Today, I'm joined by Jonathan Leafe, a growth consultant who helps agency owners build better businesses and actually enjoy the ride while finding financial freedom. In this episode, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of agency growth, especially that tricky stage when you hit between 10 to 25 employees. Jonathan calls it the fear of 13, that point where you need to get your processes and systems in order, or things can get messy fast. We talk about how to strike the right balance when hiring, why realistic forecasting does really matter, and why sustainable growth isn't just about constantly chasing new business. It's about taking care of your clients you already have. Jonathan shares some brilliant insights on shifting from being a transactional service provider to becoming a strategic advisor, really understanding your clients' business cycles and why retention is the key to growth. Your existing clients are your biggest asset. They're the fastest route to growth and your best source of referrals. We also touch on the challenges agencies are likely to face continuing into 2025. But Jonathan's take is refreshingly optimistic. If you stay proactive, strategic, and focused on your clients, you'll not just survive, you'll thrive. It's a seriously insightful chat with loads of practical takeaways. So let's get into it. Jonathan, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Great to be here.
So look, firstly, let me just say congratulations on another fantastic Agency Growth Summit, which was held in November. So for those listening, if you didn't attend, you need to mark it down in your diary to attend this year. Jonathan, do you have a date yet? And how can people find out about it?
Well, we do, but I don't know off the top of my head, but it's going to be sort of like similar times, probably a little bit earlier. And we've got some unbelievably good plans for it this year. So I'm meeting with the main man behind it in London in a couple of weeks' time.
Fantastic. So is that November? Is that the sort of time?
It will be November, yeah. And we'll be doing it over 2 or 3 days again.
Fantastic. All right. Well, those listening, keep your eyes out. Link up with Jonathan on LinkedIn and make sure you attend it because I know it's fantastic. So look, Jonathan, agency growth is obviously what every agency wants to achieve. But there seems to be a sort of a tipping point where agencies really struggle to go from about 15 people to 25 people. What are those challenges and how do they overcome these growing pains?
Well, I actually call it the fear of 13 because it's easier to remember. And it actually happens between 10 and 15 people. You're right to say that. And of course, what it is that with 10 people or 15 people, pretty much you know everything that's going on. But once you go over that tipping point, over the 16th or 17th person, suddenly, well, what are they doing? Who's controlling them? Who's in contact? Who's actually determining if their work's good? What are they doing? Who's scheduling their work? It becomes a different beast. So I like to call it anywhere between like 10 and 15 people to 20, 25 people. You like crossing the desert. And I think it's a good way of thinking about it because what you've got to do is you've completely got to change how you operate. You've got to have processes, systems. And if you think you had processes and systems when you're 10 people, then think again because you absolutely need to nail these down. Otherwise, it's complete chaos. And you might grow, but actually you might become incredibly unprofitable. You suddenly think, well, when we were 10 people, we're making £200,000. Now we're 20 people, we're not making any money. What's happening? So it's very, very difficult to do, but it's a mindset change.
So when people are thinking about hiring, so, maybe you are getting to that point where you're getting more work on and you're constantly deciding whether to sort of hire ahead of the curve or wait until there's a proven need. How can agencies balance that resource investment, without overextending or under-delivering?
It's very difficult to do. I think there's 2 ways of looking at it. If you, for example, have plenty of money in the bank, you've got 3, 6 months, 9 months, or even 12 months reserves, then obviously it gives you a little bit more latitude as what you can do. So perhaps you can hire against the curve there. So for example, I always say to all of my clients, if Lionel Messi, footballer, comes knocking on your door, then you're going to hire him, aren't you? Because he might never appear again. But if you're just hiring for different roles, then perhaps you can hire slightly behind the curve, or actually just have a bank of freelancers that can step in to like cover that gap whilst you are hiring for a full time. I think you've got to be really careful. If you don't have the resources, if you're actually in cash, then hiring ahead of the curve is a very, very dangerous thing to do, particularly if you're working on forecasts which are still a bit finger in the air. You don't really know what's going to happen. Yeah, of course, you hope for the best, but if the worst happens and suddenly you're left with this wage bill that doesn't support, or the agency cannot support this wage bill, then you've got to go into reverse very, very quickly, and that's demoralizing for everybody concerned, and that can end up in disaster. So I think you've got to feel your way into it, and you won't make that mistake many times. That's the thing. So I have a hard against ahead of the curve many times. I've also not, and I think it's just feeling your way. Suddenly, you sort of know what to do. If that person's right, get them because you regret not having them. Or alternatively say, well, what happens if that contract doesn't happen, or if that forecast doesn't materialize as we hoped it? Then you're suddenly in big problems.
It's funny, isn't it? Because before this, we were just talking about forecasting and how important it is to be able to make those type of decisions. And I've seen it myself. I know you've seen it yourself, where people just overinflate their forecastings, or just, really hope that they're going to get something and then make decisions based on that, and how dangerous that can actually be down the line, because anything can happen. Markets change all the time. If you are totally overinflating your forecasting and you're not doing it based on real genuine insights, then you're going to be leading yourself into a difficult situation, aren't you?
Yeah, 100%. Until it's actually in the door, then it's not in the door. It doesn't exist. I've heard so many times with clients of mine and saying, "Oh, it's definitely going to come in. It's next week. They've told us it's going to happen," and of course, it doesn't happen. And I say, "Well, bird in the hand is worth two in the bush," type thing. So I think you've got cautious. Actually, is my caution is the way I've always operated the business, and look long term. There's no point in actually risking the agency on a 6-month or a 12-month basis. Why would you do that? I think that small and steady growth is always the right way to do it, because then you can handle a few bad decisions, or you can handle a few bad things that are going to happen. But and then of course the nice thing to have, if all this work turns up, you think, well, my God, that's the best problem in the world, right? You'll do it. You'll get on with it. You'll find a way of delivering it. You don't want to be sort of like stressing everybody out doing it, but it's better to have that than everyone sat around thinking, well, you said that client was going to turn up and that they haven't.
And it's interesting there, because you talk about sustainable growth, like that slow, steady growth, which is actually really the better way of agencies growing. And we talked previously about sort of farming over hunting. How can agencies build that sustainable growth strategy, focused on retaining and expanding their existing clients?
Yeah, well, exactly. Number one, you just mentioned it, retention. Retention is absolutely everything. The old adage is that if you're in the bath, you've got to have the plug in whilst you're filling it with water, because a lot of agencies operate on the basis that they're going to have the taps full on, but the plug's out, or the front door is wide open to welcome all these new clients in. But guess what? The back door's also open, and all of those other clients are walking out because you're not looking after them. So relationships, build on what you have got. Your existing clients are your fortune. They absolutely are. You've got to make sure that, metaphorically, you've got someone at the back door with a shotgun saying no one is leaving. So you've really got, that comes down to really good account management, and making sure that you are managing those relationships as well as you possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, you are speaking over my to my own heart, because that's everything that I am very passionate about, is making sure that the clients that you actually have within your agency are treated the way that they should be treated, that they are retained, that you're giving them that value, because those growth opportunities within your existing clients is the quickest and easiest way for them to grow their agencies in that sustainable way, rather than kind of just, as we keep talking about, this sort of hope and pipe dream of the new business. Everyone seems to like to go for the new logos. It's nice and exciting, but for a sustainable growth approach, making sure that you are keeping and retaining and growing using referrals and, growing internally in those accounts is going to be the much more productive way of growing your agency.
Absolutely is. If you think about this in simple terms, whereas if you have a churn rate of, say, 20%, that's not very much, to be honest. Things happen, but 20% business goes every year. and you want to achieve 20% growth, which sounds fair enough, actually that's 40% new business every year. So actually that's hard in itself. So you've got to think that and if your churn was 50% and you want to grow by 20%, that's 70% new business you've got to get in every year. That's absolutely exhausting and very, very difficult to achieve. So absolutely. And you actually just mentioned it again before, is that your existing clients are your one source of the easiest growth, because you've got to see yourself as their main advisor when it comes to marketing or digital or e-commerce. Moving forward, much more than they do about their businesses because they're too close to it. So if you're there listening to what's going on in their business, you can make suggestions, you can go with ideas to them that they hadn't thought of themselves. And guess what? You might even get the business from it. And even if you don't get the business from those extra little pitches you do to your existing clients, then they're going to see you as that person who's really interested in their success. And that's why we exist. If you are an order taker and you are waiting for the client to email you or ring you on the phone, then someone else will take their business from you very quickly. So you've got to be an order maker, not an order taker. You've got to also, another good exercise to do in your head and your agency's head, to say, right, our clients are sat around a board table now, they're discussing us. What are they saying?
Yeah.
No, and actually that's quite cathartic, because saying, crikey, my bloody hell, I don't know what they're saying, then that's the problem. So you sort of got to know that if a question is asked at the board table, so, well, how are you getting on with this, with your agency? And they say, do you know what, we couldn't live without them. They're brilliant. They came up with this brilliant idea and they made me look really good because of it. Then they ain't going anywhere. But if someone says, well, what's the agency? Well, we're having a few troubles with them now. They're quite expensive. We've got XYZ agency knocking on our door. Shall we have a look at them? Yeah. So maintaining that relationship and actually delivering that extra stuff that you haven't necessarily been asked to deliver, that's where the success really lies. We had clients in my agency that we'd been servicing for 10, 15 years. Because we felt like we were part of their business, and they felt that they needed us to help them with their business. So we became part of the furniture. That's a different ball game as well, of course. But absolutely, if you want to build that business around your existing clients, then that's the best way to do it. And it makes sales moving forward much, much easier as well, because you can pick and choose. You're not desperate.
Yeah, completely. I had that with one of my clients. I worked on them in my agency for 7 years, and I just knew them inside and out. I knew their processes. I knew they had to use an internal system to do all of their marketing through it. And I knew the stakeholders. I knew the data person. I knew the brand person. I knew all the different stakeholders within the business. So much so that it was just a natural, we'll give the work to them, because I don't have to reintroduce you to everyone. I don't have to train you up on the systems. I don't have to go through it's painful to get a new agency in. So that's where,
exactly. And also you've got to remember, be really nice and really attentive to the younger ones in their team as well, because their younger ones are going to be senior at some stage. So they've got to feel part of it, because sometimes obviously they get promoted and think, well, let's have a bit of a change, because they weren't really very nice to me. I've got my own connections, so let's bring them in. So you've got to have a full holistic approach when it comes to maintaining your client relationships.
I always say that, when you're thinking about having your Christmas drinks, don't just invite your direct contact.
100%.
Invite all the people that you touch, even if you don't really know them that well. Like I said before, the guy who deals with GDPR compliance and a brand person or procurement, don't leave them out, because they're the ones that are also, they might be blockers, they might be influencers. It's making sure that you are talking to that whole stakeholder environment, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
So from your perspective,
talk about this forever.
I'm sure we could. So from your perspective, Jonathan, how can agencies, because I know that the challenge that a lot of agencies have is that particularly client services are very focused on that sort of transactional delivery, got to get the job done. How can agencies support their teams in sort of lifting their heads up a little bit to think about how to have more of those strategic conversations with their clients to show and add that different level of value?
Well, number one, it depends on the size of the agency. So, for example, agency A, if it's sort of like 15 plus, then you should absolutely separate account management out from delivery, because the account manager should be the one who is looking for client satisfaction and client growth, where the delivery team are looking just to deliver excellence and quality on time, on budget. So that is something that you should definitely split out. If they're bundled together, it doesn't work for a larger agency. However, on a smaller agency, when you can't have that function split out, then it's really important that you keep on talking. It's down to the leader of the business to make sure that everybody is focused in that way and thinking that way. Otherwise, they won't, because they'll just focus on the delivery, which obviously is counterproductive to what we've just discussed.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So circling back on your growth summit from November, I was just thinking it's really interesting to know what, or if, did anything come out from what the view of what 2025 is going to look like for agencies? Is there a more positive mindset going into 2025? Are agencies...
Spoiler alert coming. In all honesty, I don't think so. I think because we seem to be in a world perma crisis, and the economic situation across the globe and in England is tough, and I think the agencies always feel that. They might not. They sort of feel it early, and that's but they're also the ones who are last to come back quite often. So it's going to be a mixed bag. Some will do extremely well. The ones that are on the front foot doing all the things that we say will absolutely be fine, and they will do well. But the ones who are very much along the lines of, we're just waiting for the business to come in. We need the work to do. The minute you start to think about we need the work, then you're almost on a track going backwards. And then, unfortunately, these sort of wildfire of permacrisis and the economic stress, they sort of clear out a few agencies. So a lot of people that were there with 5 people are probably now down to 3 people, or some of them were at 25, they might be down to 20. So I think that's what will continue to happen. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. In my agency, we went through at least 3 recessions. We went through technology changes. When I started my agency, the internet didn't exist. And when it did start to exist, it was dial-up. And when all of those sort of things, you just have to deal with what's in front of you. That's the only advice I can say. So don't just think things are going to get better and everything's going to be fine. You've got to get on your front foot and get out there and work hard and wrap your arms around your existing clients and make sure they're doing well. And also the other thing, I won't go into it here, but this is because it's such a long way of doing it. Try and work on the league table of your clients. Make sure you really understand what clients are delivering to you and what you're delivering to them, and always be looking for opportunities and back the right horse. So if you've got a client in an industry that's growing fast, make sure you're on top of them. Or if you're in a client that's going slightly backwards, make sure you're maintaining them. So you've got to adjust your focus to what's happening out there. Sorry, it's not great news, but that's all I can say.
No, but it's great insight. So, but if it was you back in your agency, so obviously you used to have an agency, you were back in your agency and you were going into 2025, where would your focus be?
Well, I'd be looking at the clients who are growing. Look at the clients who are sort of like in an economic cycle that's on the up. And I would be backing them definitely. I would be obviously supporting the ones that are struggling or flatlining or going backwards, but the strategy would be totally different for them. You've got to be realistic about these sort of things. So that's what I would be doing. I would absolutely focus on the businesses that are going to take me with them as well. Because if you've got a client, for example, we had one client who was a building services company. And when we started working with them, they had 5 or 6 outlets. They've now got 135. You see what I mean? So yeah. I don't know if the agency is still working with them, by the way, but I still know the owner of this particular business. He's an absolutely fantastic guy, I have to say. But he's now £1 billion business. But when we started working with them, they were, 30 million. So if you get that sort of client, they will take you with them.
Yeah. Which is ultimately why my company is called Client Success Matters, because ultimately your client success will make your agency successful, because if you are, it's all that matters, isn't it? It really, really is.
Yeah. It's all that matters.
Yeah. Client success, focus on that. Make sure you're aligning everything to their
100%,
business.
100%. And there's so many agencies that just don't do that
Yeah.
because they're just waiting for orders.
Yeah, totally. Don't be an order taker. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Look, Jonathan, I've loved this. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on to the podcast and giving us your insights.
My pleasure. Yeah.
And again, for those listening, don't forget to look out for Jonathan's agency summit, that's Growth Summit, that's coming in November as well. Link up with him on LinkedIn and you'll get all the insights there.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Jonathan.